Jay, how you doing, man? Good to see you.
Doing great. Good to see you as well. Can't complain. How are things going for you?
Yeah, good, good. I'm glad we were able to reschedule. So thanks so much for the Brand Innovators team and community for flexibility on this. Jay and I met a few weeks ago to prepare, and with some scheduling changes had to push back. So I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks. I'll start out by introducing myself real quick. My name is Casey Saran, and I'm the co-founder and CEO at Spaceback. Um, my most of my career has been in programmatic advertising, and what I just saw was that there was such a disparity between the quality of content brands were creating on social media, and their social and presence, the level of investment in Facebook posts and Instagram and TikTok, was just night and day compared to the quality of content in banner ads. And as a result, consumers tend to ignore most banner ads. So our company built a platform that automatically recreates social media experiences in standard ad units. So that any brand who's running a social presence and also running ads outside of social can run leverage their social media investment, the look and feel of that content for much better performance in paid media world. So I've been at the intersection of social media and programmatic for a while, and excited to talk to Jay. Jay, maybe I'll let you introduce yourself before I pepper you with questions.
Yeah, sounds great. I'll introduce myself and give a quick overview of Winc as well. So I very much started my career as a generalist in the technology consulting space, really leading massive transformations for companies across the country from a technology perspective, kind of using technology to drive internal cost efficiencies as well as amazing consumer experiences. So started out as a consultant in the technology space and slowly started to see my passion for Bird as a product. Bird scooters is kind of my first foray into the startup world. I was actually, when I was in consulting and I was visiting my clients, found myself taking scooters to and from my client site. And as just a lover of the product, I decided to join the organization, really get myself into the startup world, get my feet wet. And at Bird, I played a wide variety of roles, very much focused on strategy and operations, but also started to lead one of their new ventures called Monthly Rentals. We launched a monthly rental product in San Francisco, Miami, Barcelona, and started to own that P&L for a little bit, really starting to get that full depth of P&L management experience. From there, I went to Fair.com, which is a startup in the vehicle subscription space. They actually just sold to another company, but to lead customer retention efforts. And that was my first foray into kind of consumer retention. I was focused on retaining. They had a product that would rent cars to Uber drivers so that they can use them to make a living. So I was focused on retaining those drivers in our cars. And then I found Winc, and my journey at Winc has been incredibly interesting, but I'll give a quick overview of Winc as a company before I dive into that. Winc designs, produces, and sells innovative beverage brands, very focused on the next generation of consumers, so Millennial and Gen Z, very focused on the wine space today. We distribute in an omni-channel way, direct to consumer through winc.com, the wine subscription, as well as in retail stores and restaurants across the country. We develop our own brands that we then scale through distributors and retailers. So really focused on growing brands in an omni-channel way, which makes it an incredibly unique business because there are very few scaled omni-channel platforms in beverage alcohol, and none with several of an entire portfolio of brands. So that's what makes Winc a super interesting company. And I kind of started my career here in the direct-to-consumer space, focused on winc.com, the subscription, running that P&L, focused on customer retention and customer experience. Early last year, really started to focus in the marketing space by taking on the performance marketing team. And that was my first foray just a year ago into the world of marketing, particularly in e-commerce. And as of a few months ago, moved into the CMO role where I oversee the direct-to-consumer business, that P&L, as well as omni-channel growth, so retail growth for some of our core brands, particularly focused on our largest brand, Summer Water, this year, which I'm very excited about. But oversee everything from marketing to creative to engineering, analytics, as well as a team of general managers focused on driving our P&L. So, my background as a generalist, my love for technology, and my recent kind of foray into marketing kind of led me into this role today, where it's very much a non-traditional CMO role in that it encompasses a lot of P&L management and a lot of different functions, but absolutely loving every minute of it.
Amazing. Thank you. And it sounds like your experience at Bird was pretty really got your wheels turning more on kind of data-driven approaches to growing retention. Scooter is so different than your current business, but what are some of the things that you learned about branding from a more data-driven retention model, or are those different things?
Yeah, no, I think, Bird was an incredible deep dive into the world of data analytics and how you can use analytics to drive business decisions. And the types of analytics and the types of things that we had to work on there are probably some of the most difficult. You can kind of equate it to Uber when we're talking about very much a marketplace type of model where you're balancing supply and demand, as well as ownership of assets, all in one issue. So trying to figure out, the best locations across the city, the best intersections to place a scooter, the best times to put them there to maximize demand and maximize usage of those assets. You kind of see the whole spectrum of analytics issues, and that was an incredible deep dive. I started a little bit to use that type of skill set in terms of customer retention at Bird, but really when I went to Fair, I was able to leverage that insight and that knowledge to really look at things like LTV curves, cancellation rates, projecting out future cohort value, and apply it in a very marketing way. But compared to the type of marketplace issues and supply and demand imbalances that we were solving at Bird, it almost makes these types of problems seem easier. But that was a great entry point into the world of analytics, and has really helped me become a very data-driven marketer.
Yep. And a lot of times when we see campaigns, the world is, or I won't say the world, budgets, still seem to be somewhat bifurcated between, performance budget and branding budget. And it sounds like, the way that you think about marketing, or it's all performance in a way, but how is your background, from Bird and Fair and focused on like user retention, educated how you approach, either measurement or creative or these other things that tend to be less about, the hard numbers, or less data driven at the surface?
Yeah, I think it's all about approaching problems in a logical, structured way. So when looking at an issue like brand versus performance marketing and how you allocate budgets and how you allocate spend, you can look at the numbers, but it's important to take a step back and understand the limitations of the data that you're looking at. If you're evaluating brand spend based off of performance marketing metrics, you're not going to see good results, and you're never going to allocate dollars there. So there are ways that you can look at kind of how you're allocating spend across channels, what KPIs you're looking at, and what period that you're looking at to really drive decisions. I think for things like brand spend, looking at conversion rate or click-through rate may not be the best metric to look at. Maybe you have to take a step back and look at pre-post analyses between markets. You have to run regressions, holdout tests, et cetera. There are different ways to go about measuring that, but I think if you take a very rigid approach to any of these problems that you're solving, and you're able to kind of understand the data that you're looking at and the limitations of that and adjust your approach accordingly, I think that's really the learning in terms of like how to solve a wide variety of complex problems. And the one that you had mentioned when looking at brand versus performance marketing is just another use case of an application of a problem solving model.
Yep, makes sense. It sounds like there's a lot of advantages coming from like a kind of a data-driven analytics background into a CMO role. What are some of the challenges, if any?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly difficult role. I think, the biggest challenge that I would call out is, truly operating as a CMO and understanding what that means. I think, a lot of the times the lines are blurred between a director of marketing and a director of growth who's really responsible for allocating spend and testing new channels. A VP of marketing who's responsible for that, but also looking at the brand and the consumer experience and taking a step back there. And the role of a CMO, which is very, very different from what I'm used to, but it should really be focused on one, providing challenge to the team, obviously building that team, but providing challenge to that team in the form of asking the right questions, and then primarily focused on driving executive strategy with the rest of the executive group. So I would say that the largest differentiation and the most difficult part of this role has been actually taking myself out of that process as an operator and as a day-to-day executor. The things that I love, making data-driven decisions, really in it with analytics, and looking at charts every single day, trying to allocate spend, getting myself out of that world and really putting myself in a position where I'm having to flex different muscles and different skill sets, like how to hire the right employees, how to build a team, how to maintain organizational health, how to retain that team, and ultimately use my skill sets from what I've learned over the past several years to help drive executive strategy forward and corporate strategy, really understand the best areas of business to allocate investment, how to operate the P&L, how to leverage macroeconomic trends to help drive the best decisions for our business internally, trade-offs between growth and profitability. So I'd say the most difficult part has truly been, understanding and getting used to what that role of a CMO should really look like in an organization where you kind of have those other roles filled, taking a step back and offering the right level of challenge to the team.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm overwhelmed just listening to all those. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff in there, and things that I'm sure as you grow can be. I mean, you talk about things like, like responding to macroeconomic, geopolitical situations, and how you think about in those settings, like can be, more people depending on like changing, times and where you're investing. Can you talk a little bit about what your org structure looks like and how you envision it to evolve as we're coming out of the pandemic?
Yeah. So, I mean, the driving force behind how our organization is structured is our ability to support multiple brands in the best and most efficient way possible. So we kind of have this nuance of having multiple brands and also multiple channels, direct to consumer and wholesale. So the way that the team is structured is that I have a VP of marketing that's focused on performance marketing, creative, and customer experience. So all of those things that are kind of very customer top of funnel focused, and creating, obviously allocating budgets, but also making sure that there's a consistent experience across our brands, across those three functions. And that organization, that marketing specific organization, spans across all of our brands as well as Winc.com, which is our direct to consumer subscription business. So that's kind of one arm of the organization. Another arm of the organization has to do with Winc.com. So you have kind of a lead or a general manager of that organization, as well as engineering and analytics functions that report into that person. Winc.com is a completely homegrown system. It was built over 10 years ago, and the world of e-commerce today is so different than it was 10 years ago. The tools, the Shopify's of the world, those things didn't exist that long ago in this capacity. So it's a completely homegrown system. So we have a really strong team of engineers and analytics folks to support that business. And then this is really where we get to the scalable part as we start focusing on more and more brands. Have a general manager focused on Summer Water, which is our #1 brand right now, as well as a small team under her. And she's really focused on driving omni-channel growth across both direct to consumer and wholesale for that brand and managing that brand's P&L. And in the future, as we continue to expand, obviously one of the impacts of the pandemic, we saw a huge surge in adoption of e-commerce. Wholesale is coming back quicker than ever. So as we scale the number of brands that we look at, not only will we build under these general managers to provide a larger support structure, but we'll also bring on new general managers to help lead some of the brands that we really want to focus on and really focus on growth across channels with that shared service marketing team to support them.
Sorry about that. In terms of the marketing needs across the different general managers, do they tend to be similar and you can build almost like more machines of how you help them, or are they kind of unique asks that require unique solutions?
Yeah, I would say that there are two categories. One is very performance marketing driven, performance creative, really just measuring LTV to CAC, and that's for Winc.com. And that's the main need for that organization. And there's a very separate need for how we grow and scale brands, because that's going to require a lot heavier investment on the top of the funnel. Brand marketing, sponsorships, partnerships, in-person experiential activations. So I'd say there are two very different categories of marketing, but as we add new brands, they'll all really fall under that latter half. So right now we're just focused on summer water from a brand perspective in terms of marketing team focus on growth and general manager focus on growth. And we'll use this as a case study to kind of build that muscle of brand marketing as an organization and slowly start to scale our investment from a personnel as well as a marketing spend perspective on other brands as well.
Cool. Makes sense. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about the different channels that you're active in. Is social media important to your general marketing presence?
Yeah, absolutely. So the last 12 to 15 months have been an absolute roller coaster when it comes to paid social and digital marketing. And I'm sure everybody's tired of hearing that. But we can, the way in which we approached it, a couple of ways. Obviously, we have two driving issues over the last 12 months. One being iOS 14.5 and the tracking and visibility issues that's caused. The second, which I think is the more pressing issue, has been rising CPMs. Year over year for the last 2 years, 50% increases, a total of 100% plus compounded. That has had a huge impact on our brands as well as brands across the globe. And the ways in which we've approached that are two ways. Number one, we actually really focused on paid social as this was happening in terms of improving our creative, getting click-through rates up, improving ad to page relevancy from our landing pages, and then really optimizing our conversion funnel to make that channel actually work for us, which we were able to do. And, we've been able to scale that channel more so than we would have thought during these times. At the same time, we were also looking at diversifying across channels to your original question. Obviously, we're on social from a paid and organic basis. We're on search. We used to have a relatively small influencer marketing and affiliate marketing program. Those programs have since grown in scope over the last 12 months and really contributing to a larger percentage of our new customer acquisition. And we've also started to explore more traditional channels like direct mail. Direct mail has been almost like a little secret weapon over the last 6 months in terms of efficiency and our ability to scale it. We're looking at partnerships with other brands. How can we use, inbox inserts, do swaps with other brands to drive new customer activations? Inbox inserts are the only form of marketing that have 100% open rate. So that's been widely successful for us. So really a combined approach of really digging in, understanding the issues with paid social, which is obviously where the majority of our spend is, and making improvements at every step along the way, as well as a level of channel diversification into channels like affiliate and influencer, as well as some more traditional channels like direct mail and partnerships.
Yeah, I'm really interested to dive in on the, sounds like you've pared back working with influencers a little bit and you're still open to it as a channel, but can you share a little bit more about kind of your experience, challenges, opportunity with influencers and why that's something you're still optimistic about?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly had its fair share of ups and downs and is also very dependent on two things. Number one is how you use influencers, and two, on algorithms. And so on the first piece, in terms of how we use influencers, you can either use them for content or you can use them for distribution. And in the past, we found the most success using them for distribution, not necessarily content that we then whitelist on things like paid social. We found it to be a highly effective way, assuming we're choosing the right influencers, to target our key audience and to drive conversions. And we did that for a very long time, and we scale up or down depending on the success that we're seeing out in the market. Every day, every week, every month, there are changes being made to the algorithm that impact views of different things like in-feed posts, story posts, reels, etc. So we constantly have to be adapting to that. And our budgets flex up and down depending on the ROI that we're seeing on our buckets of paid spend on influencers. The second piece around content, I know over the last 12 to 15 months, content marketing and using influencers for content and then whitelisting those influencers for paid social has been incredibly effective for a lot of brands. We've been unique in a way in that, we've found that making that content internally that looks like, very UGC, very native to the platform, but also something that's directly focused on selling. And of course, we know our customers best, has been a lot more effective than trying to prescribe a certain type of content to an influencer to create, or even allowing them to have the creative freedom to create their own content. That works when they're distributing to their engaged audience because there's an alignment between that style of content and their audience. It's worked a lot less when we then take that and we try to use it in more paid advertising and distribute it on a CPM basis. So a little bit unique to our brand, but as we talked about at the beginning, constantly evaluating new things, looking at the data and making decisions, but being incredibly flexible along the way.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think a lot of brands value the content that influencers are creating more than their distribution. And it sounds like for you, it's still they're almost a channel to reach more of the right audience, more so than a content creator. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what we've seen. That's what we've seen historically. Obviously, it's very dependent on algorithms and the kind of reach of their content, but that's what we've seen historically. And not to say that content isn't good for distribution. We've just found that we've been able to make more effective content internally.
Yep. No, it totally makes sense. And I think too, a big challenge is the distribution and the content are connected with the influencer. Someone seeing content created, by that influencer, and there's a different kind of relevancy when you're seeing that content outside of the social channel. If it's not based on you're following this influencer, you've signaled some kind of interest, it cannot necessarily feel as relevant. So I do think it's a targeting challenge in some ways too, of how do you get that get the influencers' audiences and identify them in other ways other than just extending content through an influencer.
Yeah, certainly a targeting challenge, and then you're faced with a scalability challenge after that, unless you have a very, very broad influencer program and generating a ton of content. But yeah, I mean, these are all of the fun problems that I love about what I do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you could totally create the scale challenge by solving the targeting challenge. And sometimes that's the right thing to do. Makes sense. Sure. Cool. Well, can you talk to us, tell us, we talked about a few case studies of, since you've come on, some successes with retention. Can you share one of those case studies with the Brand Innovators group?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the retention side, coming into Winc, that's the first thing that I really focused on is how to improve customer retention. And I'll take you through a couple of things that we looked at and ended up implementing. But I mean, taking a step back, retention is really based on the expectations that you're setting when a customer is coming on board and whether or not you're meeting those expectations. At the end of the day, it's simply that. So having a retention function that's not tightly integrated with the marketing function, or having a marketing function make promises that the product can't deliver on, are some of the core issues that we see in retention programs across brands. Now, when I came in, I took kind of two approaches. I think the first approach that I took was really a data-driven cohort-based analysis of, where are cohorts dropping off? Why are they dropping off? And digging in to identify the largest opportunities. And then obviously creating solutions to go after each of those opportunities and A/B testing those solutions. Another approach that I took was listening to customers, looking at NPS, looking at comments. And that's where, our biggest thing actually stood out. When I had joined, we were just coming off of the pandemic. And obviously with the pandemic, we had a surge of demand. And that means we had limited supply and a very limited number of SKUs. And that essentially was the largest problem that our customers were facing from a retention perspective, because they were coming in with the expectation that we were a wine club with dozens, if not hundreds of SKUs for them to discover and choose from. And at the time we had 30. And that simply wasn't cutting it. And that mismatch between expectations and reality was really what was driving the root of a lot of our retention problems. So that was the original identification. We were able to get a cross-functional team together, really work with our product and operations team to quickly scale up the number of SKUs that we had on the site in order to meet customer demand. And what we saw as a result of that was obviously increasing LTV and retention, higher NPS by about 20 points, and also dramatically increasing average order values about 30+% or so over the course of the last 18 months since we've implemented that solution and scaled up the number of SKUs that we have available on the site. And not only did that help with the retention problem, but it also helped with gross margin and gross profit and the leverage that we have there, especially in the wake of supply chain and inflation issues. But going back to the original retention issue, I'd always approach it in two ways. One is more qualitative, listening to customers. One is more quantitative, doing cohort-based and cancellation reason analyses, and kind of bringing those together to identify a list of solutions and remediations that we can make on the customer experience end to really meet the expectations that we're setting when we acquire a customer. So I would say those are kind of the approach as well as the key solution that got us to where we are today.
Yep. And I have a question that I love the opportunity to ask people these kind of questions, because it's where I learn the most. But that process makes so much sense, right? You identified that not enough SKUs was the issue. You got more SKUs, people are happy, you make more, profit goes up. In terms of I know there's probably a lot of challenges along the way, and I'm curious, in this process, were the challenges in having the right data to identify that SKUs was the problem, or was it once that was the problem, it was hard to scale up SKUs because of supply chain issues, or what were the hiccups in that process that you might, or some of the challenges to get through that?
Yeah, and this was actually a welcome challenge. I mean, you think about cross-functional alignment between leaders and executives and functions. This is a prime example of that, right? So when in wine, obviously a very, very seasonal product and very hard to scale up on demand. There's typically annual harvests, and you're kind of producing your allocated quantity, and then that's kind of what you have for the year. We have a very dynamic sourcing model that certainly helps with that. But there are two issues. One is from a product perspective, are we going to be able to get the right quality of juice for our customers? Do we, the product team, have the bandwidth to scale up that quickly given everything else going on? And from a cash cycle perspective, it's actually a very heavy investment up front to buy all of this product, all of this diversification, send them to bottling, and then make that back over a period of 12 to 18 months. And as a relatively smaller company, that's a real consideration. So it was really getting that cross-functional alignment across finance and operations on whether or not this is, the actual right decision. From a marketing and retention perspective, it was very clear that this was the one thing that would really get us over the hump from a retention, NPS, and average order value perspective. But those were the other considerations that we had to take into account, and the problems that were raised up cross-functionally. And those are the types of challenges that really make you think critically to get to the right decision. What we ended up doing with that challenge is we did a very short-term test where we actually sourced some products from some partner winemakers, weren't brands that we had created ourselves, put it on the site for a limited period of time in a certain number of states, and did almost hack together an A/B test to understand what type of impact an increase in SKUs would have on our site. And we saw that it was really as significant as originally hypothesized. So we decided it was the right direction to make the investment in. But the biggest challenge, and one that I welcomed, was kind of that cross-functional collaboration and thinking and understanding where other functions are coming from or how this decision impacts the organization as a whole.
Yep. And therein lies I think most of the challenges, and why I love getting to ask that question. It sounds like this probably helped you gain a lot of trust internally pretty quickly, as this was one of the first initiatives you focused on. When did you first start? You said it was not long after the pandemic started.
Yeah, I started July of 2020.
Wow. Yeah, crazy timing. So can you tell us, like, with the world getting back to normal, are there, it seems like, you started in such a crazy time. Like, how is it talking to, other people? Are things like getting back to normal, or is there never going to be a normal after, what the business has been through in the pandemic? Like how
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty of it is that we're scaled across channels, and in 2020, and you kind of see like the cyclicality there. In 2020, direct to consumer just went through the roof, and we were able to acquire customers at prices we never thought we were able to acquire customers at, and it enabled us to scale our direct to consumer business a lot. Now, of course, since then, that's very difficult growth to come to. So we have to have more sustainable, profitable growth on the channel. But at the same time, in 2020, when restaurants were shut down, when less people were going out to shop at grocery stores, our wholesale business suffered from a growth perspective. And we weren't seeing the type of growth that we wanted to see in that channel because essentially restaurants were shut. And so as we kind of get out of that world and resuming normalcy, I think we've seen slow but steady growth rates on direct to consumer in a healthy, very profitable way, and a resurgence of our wholesale business as people start to go out, as accounts start to open up. And so, our two business models or two business channels have really been able to offset each other over the course of the last few years. I think what's changed from our perspective is how we think about varying levels of investment and capital allocation, especially in a tightening macroeconomic environment. And previously, where the payback and LTV to CAC and internal rate of return on direct to consumer and scaling that business was a no-brainer, very similarly, we're seeing the growth of wholesale be along those lines. So it's really a capital allocation problem of where we want to scale and grow and where we can find the best internal rate of return relative to our cost of capital. And right now, that's really focused on growing that wholesale business as we come out of the pandemic.
Yep. And you talked about, number of SKUs being a challenge early on in the pandemic. As you're coming out of the pandemic, what do you anticipate to be the biggest retention challenges in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think what we've been seeing, obviously, with surge of demand, people were exclusively shopping online, and now that's started to balance out a little bit. So it's really about meeting customer needs. Like, originally, one of the biggest value props that we had for customers during the peak of the pandemic was, our ability to deliver right at your doorstep, and you don't have to leave your house, don't have to expose yourself to anything. It was a great value proposition. And now, obviously, while that's important, that can't be what stands out. And one of the things that I've been focusing on is how we shift our lens of having to acquire customers from a specific channel versus being there when they want to buy a product and how they want to get a product. And we can really leverage, our scale across stores and across direct to consumer for that. If you want to keep your wine fridge stocked on a consistent cadence, if you want to explore and discover new products and brands from across the globe, sign up for a Winc membership. But if you want to purchase that day for an event, or you're going over to a friend's house and need something quicker than that, like, how can we make our brands known and available to you, as well as our points of distributions known and available to you? So from shifting our focus from like a channel base, we need to acquire X number of customers, get X revenue, to a consumer base. Once we acquire a customer, we don't really care where they purchase, whether it's direct to consumer or buying our product in store. It's really about what's most convenient to them at that point in time and what meets their needs. That's kind of how we're shifting our focus a little bit to meet the consumer where they're at, and hopefully keep them within the Winc ecosystem.
Yep. No, makes complete sense. And how you're structured with kind of different business leaders and work with both of them. It seems like your org structure supports kind of people can buy from you however they want to. Do you feel like your or I guess more fun question, any new products coming up, or anything you can hint about that we should be excited about?
Yeah. No specifics, but we're certainly looking to get cross category, right? Winc started in wine, but really focused on making drinks that the next generation of consumers is really going to enjoy, that enhance their everyday moments. We recently launched a sake on our website that's been doing incredibly well. So that was kind of our first foray across category. But we're looking at a variety of different things. You know, ready to drink is a really interesting category. Packaging innovation from, you know, can we serve wine in a bag, or does it have to be a bottle, or things like that are things that we're looking at as well. How can we get more sustainable? So as we think about innovation, we're thinking about it from a packaging perspective as well as a cross-category perspective. So sake was our first foray there, and lots of exciting trends to keep a lookout for, and things that we're innovating on. I'd highlight ready to drink is one of those really key trends that we're seeing out in the market and want to go out and attack.
Have you drinking wine out of a bag before?
I have, and I'm very proud of it. Takes you back to the college days.
Yeah, no, I totally would. I know like box wine's got a bag inside of it, so I'm picturing like the box wine without the box.
Yeah, I mean, it's convenient. It stays out longer, and you can have some fun with it.
Nice. Yeah, and this seltzer category seems like something that wasn't even on my radar before the pandemic, and now you walk, you know, down the beer aisle in the grocery store, and it's all seltzers. Is that something that you're thinking about, or is that in the ready to drink category?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly ready to drink. You know, the seltzer category is super interesting, and you know, speaking more personally, of course, as a company, we're looking at categories across the space. That is one where you had, you know, such an imbalance of supply and demand at the start, where, you know, I'd go to grocery stores to look for a case of White Claw. I just couldn't find it. And it was incredibly difficult to actually find the product. And then, you know, at this time, you have all of these manufacturers, all of this competition, seeing the space, seeing the trends, and getting into it at the same exact time. And now you have an imbalance in the exact opposite direction, where supply is actually exceeding demand, and the level of competition that's out there. I think, you know, a few months ago, Truly, you know, had to dispose of, I think, hundreds of thousands of cases of their product because those products aren't shelf stable past 4 months or so, and there was just an overage of supply and demand. So certainly seeing the trade-offs and economics in the seltzer specific category, not necessarily favorable to new competition, but of course that's subject to change at any point in time. I think what you're seeing a lot is you know, alcohol brands like Absolut, Grey Goose, Aperol, making ready to drink cocktails, and kind of taking the work out of putting together a craft cocktail. And that space has certainly seen a ton of growth, both in the spirits-based cocktail as well as wine-based cocktails. So that's a super interesting space.
Yep, nice. Cool. I think we're wrapping up here pretty quick. Do we have any? If there's any questions from the audience, feel free to share. And Jay, I have a few quick just fun Bird. So Bird is like, I mean, every time I go to a new city, it's like the greatest way to just kind of get your whereabouts, and you know, it's cheap and convenient. So I'm a big Bird fan. What's your favorite city or city that you've ridden a Bird on? Or favorite city you've ridden a Bird?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is gonna take me back to my consulting days, and where I, you know, first really discovered Bird, and that would be Atlanta. I just have these incredible memories of, you know, going out to dinner after work with my coworkers, and everybody was hopping in an Uber, and I'm like getting on my Bird and riding alongside them down to dinner. Just a tremendous time, and slowly over time, convincing people to join my flock, keeping up with the Bird puns. Just a fun period of time. Just really discovered passion for a product and was able to share that with a lot of folks.
Nice. Yeah. Bird first hit San Francisco while me and my co-founder were the only two people at Spaceback. So we took Birds to most meetings in the early days, and it was a blast. We still, whenever we get together in a different city, always go on a Bird flock ride together.
Yeah, I love it.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. It doesn't look like we have any questions coming in, but really want to thank you for your time and for your patience rescheduling this. Hopefully get to do it again soon.